Look at this. Somebody call the front gate and tell them the petting zoo's open. Sten Drain said it loud enough to carry the length of the kennel row, and 3 of the younger handlers laughed, because he was the one who decided which laughs got noticed. He leaned on the chain link of run number 4 with a coffee going cold in his fist and watched the woman come across the gravel toward the kennels at 0614 when the dogs were loudest and the morning was still the color of wet cement. To do. She was not in his chain of command. He did not know her name yet. He saw a civilian-cut field jacket, no rank, a lanyard with a visitor badge, clipped at the second hole instead of the first, and a woman walking toward 14 of the most dangerous animals on Joint Base San Antonio, like she had somewhere to be inside them. To Drain, that was the whole joke. A woman, a guest, somebody's consultant, strolling up to the war dog, runs in the 1 hour of the day. Even he kept his voice down. "Ma'am," he called, and put a smile on it so it would sound like help instead of a leash. "Ma'am, that's the working line. You want the visitor path, it's the other way. These aren't the kind you pet." Signe Faircliff did not answer him. She did not slow, and she did not speed up. She stopped 4 feet off the front of run number 4, where Valder, the big sable, Malinois, the kennel called the loud one, had already thrown himself at the fence twice and was winding up for a third. And she did the thing nobody on that row had ever seen a stranger do. She let the dog finish. She did not back off the fence. She did not put her hands up or her voice up. She let Valder hit the chain link and rattle the whole run, and bare every tooth he owned 8 inches from her face, and she stood with her weight already settled into her back heel. The way you stand when a thing that is about to happen has happened to you a few hundred times before. Drain was still grinning when he noticed she had not blinked. Not once. "Sss." The dog screamed at her, and her eyes stayed open and flat, and she was reading him. Run number 4, the angle of his hips, the place his weight went, the way a person reads a page. Down the row in front of run 11, an older man in a tan duty uniform with a master sergeant's stripes set his clipboard down on the feed cart very slowly and went still. Master Sergeant Edvard Falkenrath had run this kennel for 9 years. He did not know who the woman was, either. But he knew exactly what it meant when a stranger let Valder finish and did not move, and the inside of his chest had gone cold and quiet. The way the air goes before the part of the storm you can actually hear. Drain saw none of that. Drain saw a tourist who had gotten lucky and not flinched, and he came down the road to fix it before the captain showed up, and somebody got bitten on his watch. Who she was, and why the loudest dog on the base had not made her so much as lean back, was the question the whole base would be asking by noon. Drain was about to spend the next 20 minutes making sure he was the last man to find out. Before this goes any further, do me a favor, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from this morning. I want to see how far down the row this one travels. Then stay close, because the quiet ones are always the ones you have to watch. The kennels at Joint Base San Antonio held the Department of Defense Military Working Dog Program, and the program did not advertise the bad mornings. 14 dogs sat in the long row that Sten Drain half ran when the kennel master was off the floor. 11 Belgian Malinois, 2 German Shepherds, and 1 Dutch Shepherd named Falcor, who had come back from a deployment in 2019 and never quite come all the way back. They were patrol and explosives, dual certified, every one of them, which meant every one of them could find a buried charge and could also put a man on the ground and keep him there. The handlers loved them the way you love something that can kill you and chooses not to. The newer handlers, the ones who had been on the floor under 2 years, mostly loved being seen standing next to them. Drain was a staff sergeant. He was a competent handler and a louder one, and the difference between those two things had never been explained to him by anyone he respected enough to listen to. He had a way of running a room that worked as long as the room was full of people junior to him, and the kennel that morning was Falkenrath had a vet appointment for run 9 at 0700 and was already half turned toward paperwork. The handlers on the floor were a corporal named Brand Dasson, a young airman named Ricka Druitt, and 2 others, and they took their cues on what was funny from Drain because it was easier than not. So when the woman stopped at run 4 and did not move, and Drain decided to be funny about it, the floor laughed on cue. "You can't be back here," he said, closer now, the help gone out of his voice and the ownership in. "I don't care whose meeting you're early for. This is a Tier 1 working line. You touch that fence again, ma'am, and I'm calling the SDO. Senior turned her head and looked at him for the first time. She was somewhere in her 40s, weather in her face, gray coming in at one temple and not the other. She looked at him the way you look at a weather report you have already lived through. "I haven't touched the fence," she said. "Chum, Tum." Her voice was low and even, and it did not perform anything. He touched the fence. A snort came out of Brand Dasson before he could swallow it. Drain heard it, and his neck went red. And that was the moment the morning stopped being a joke and started being a thing he had to win. "Cute," Drain said. "Here's how this works. These are war dogs. Real ones. Not the kind they bring to the elementary school." He jerked his chin at run 4, where Valder was still up against the chain link, lather at the corners of his mouth. "That one has put 2 grown men in the hospital. He doesn't know you. He doesn't like you. And there is exactly one person on this floor he listens to, and you're looking at him." He said it to her, and he meant it for the floor, and he half turned to make sure the floor was still with him. He missed the thing Falkenrath did not miss. He missed that the woman had not been looking at Drain while he talked. She had been looking at Valder. And Valder, the loud one, the 2 men in the hospital one, had stopped throwing himself at the fence. He was standing square in the middle of run 4, with his ears canted forward and his head tilted half a degree, watching her hands, which had not moved, waiting for something he could not have named because dogs do not have names for it. He was waiting to be told. Down at run 11, Master Sergeant Falkenrath picked his clipboard back up off the feed cart because his hands wanted something to do and did not write anything on it. "You're going to want to step back from that run," Signy said to Drain, and it was not a threat. It was the flat, courteous warning of a person telling you the bridge is out. He's reading the wrong thing off you. You're loud and you're square to him, and your weight is forward. To him, that's a posture. Step back and turn your hip out, and he'll settle. "He'll settle," Drain repeated, "because I tell him to settle." He turned to the run, threw his shoulders back, and barked the dog's name, and a correction in the hard voice he used when people were watching. Valder's hackles came up the length of his spine, and he slammed the fence again so hard the top rail sang. Signy closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she had the look of a woman watching a man and a child, a knife, to prove the knife is safe. "Step back, Staff Sergeant," she said, and this time there was something underneath the courtesy that had not been there before, a floor under the floor. Now, before he learns he can move you, he did not step back. That was the thing she would remember about Sten Drain later, in the part of the morning that mattered. She had given him 3 chances to step back, and he had spent all 3 of them being right in front of an audience, and the dog had watched him spend every one. 20 feet behind them, the side door of the kennel office opened, and Captain Lena Vauclan came out onto the floor with a tablet under her arm and a question already on her face, because the noise had reached her office, and the noise at 0614 was wrong. She took in the row, the stranger at run 4, Drain squared up and read, Falkenrath standing too still by the feed cart, and she did what good officers do when they walk into a thing they do not understand. She stopped, and she watched, and she said nothing, and she let it tell her what it was. The thing about the kennel that morning, that nobody on the floor knew, except the Master Sergeant, who would not say it, and the woman who would not claim it, was that all 14 of those dogs had already been told, years ago, by her. and that the system had spent 3 years trying to make that fact untrue. Run number 4 had a laminated card zip-tied to the gate, the way every run did. Dog's name, chip number, handler, certifications, and at the bottom, a line for the foundation method, the protocol the dog had been first trained under. On Valder's card, that line said, in small block letters that nobody on the current floor had ever read closely, Foundation, F Protocol, Faircliff. And on the cards of all 13 other dogs in the row, the same line, the same name, because every working dog in that kennel had come up through a single training architecture that one person had built 14 years before, when the program was failing and washing out 4 dogs in 5, and burning out handlers in 18 months. And a young staff sergeant named Singin Faircliff had been told to fix it, or watch it close. She had fixed it. She had built a layered command system, quiet over loud, posture over volume, a foundation of low-condition cues that a handler could give a dog from across a road in a firefight without shouting and giving away a position. She had named it nothing fancy. The handlers had called it the Faircliff method because handlers name things after the person who yells at them until they get it right. And for 9 years, it had taken the wash rate from 4 in 5 down to 1 in 9 and put dogs downrange that came home and made Senior Faircliff the kennel master at the largest working dog program in the Air Force. And then, on a February night 3 years before this morning, a dog named Bradge had gone through a handler's forearm during a night exercise, and a young airman had nearly lost the arm, and somebody had needed it to be somebody's fault. Drain did not know any of that. Drain knew that the laminated card had a name on it he had never bothered to read, and that the woman standing at run 4 had the same last name, and that these two facts had not yet collided in his head because he was busy losing an argument with a dog. "Last time," he said to her, and reached for the radio on his shoulder. "You leave the floor on your own, or I have you removed your choice. Either way, you don't touch my dogs." "They were never your dogs," Signy said. She did not say it loud. She did not say it to the floor. She said it directly to him, and it was the first thing she had said all morning that had any edge on it at all, and the edge was not anger. It was something older and more tired than anger. It was the sound of a person who had decided, somewhere on the long drive in that morning, that she was done being quiet about exactly one thing. Then she turned back to run 4, to the dog who had been waiting the whole time to be told, and the floor got very quiet, because even the people who did not understand anything understood that something was about to happen. The reason Senior Faircliff was on that floor at 0614 on a Tuesday in a visitor badge, off the chain of command, was a folder. It had taken her 3 years and a civilian attorney and 2 denied requests under the Freedom of Information Act to get it, and the folder had arrived in her mailbox in San Marcos 11 days before this morning, and inside it was the one thing the board had told her did not exist. The night Brage went through that airman's forearm, the kennel had run a full exercise, and the exercise had been recorded, because every exercise in that yard was recorded by 4 fixed cameras with their time codes locked to the base network. After the incident, the board that investigated had reviewed, they said, all available footage, and had found that Kennel Master Faircliff's foundation protocol relied on, and these were the words in the report, non-standard low-volume commands inappropriate to a high-stress operational environment, and had recommended she be relieved and the protocol be discontinued. She had been relieved, the protocol had been, on paper, discontinued. And Signy Faircliff had spent 30 months teaching obedience classes to retired couples in a strip mall because the board had decided her life's work was the thing that nearly cost a kid his arm. Except the camera over the east gate had a time code, and the time code in the report did not match the time code on the handler's own statement. 11 seconds did not match. And in those 11 seconds on the footage, the board said it had reviewed and had not. You could see that the airman handling Brage that night had given the dog a hard verbal correction, the loud kind, the square-shouldered kind, in direct contradiction of the foundation protocol, and that he had given it because his shift supervisor that night Confident young sergeant, who thought the quiet method was soft, had told the floor to run the dogs hot, to make them sharp, to stop coddling them. The shift supervisor that night had been Sten Drain. He had been a sergeant then, not a staff sergeant. He had not been named in the report, because the report had not looked at the 11 seconds where he leaned into frame and told the airman to put some bass in it. The report had needed the failure to live in the method and not in the man, because the method belonged to a woman who was already gone on a Friday and the man was still there on Monday. So the 11 seconds went into a folder, and the folder went into a drawer, and the drawer stayed shut for 3 years, until a civilian attorney and a stubborn woman in a strip mall pried it open. Pad. So when Seton Faircliff drove 4 hours north that morning, she had not come to pet the dogs. She had come because the folder gave her standing to request a formal records correction. And the correction hearing was at 0900 in the building 200 yards behind the kennel, and she had arrived early. And she had walked the long way around, the way that took her past the runs, because she had not seen the dogs she raised in 3 years, and she was not strong enough to walk past them without looking. That was the whole reason she was at Run 4. Not to prove anything. To say goodbye to 14 dogs she had been told were not hers. She had not planned for Sten Drain to be standing in front of Run 4, telling her the dogs only listened to him. Captain Vauclain, watching from 20 feet back, did not have the folder and did not know the history. But she had a tablet, and the tablet had the kennel roster, and while Drain reached for his radio, she had quietly thumbed to the personnel notes on Run 4, because a captain who walks into a thing she does not understand starts reading. And what she read made her stop, with her thumb still on the glass. The foundation line. The name, Faircliff. She looked up from the tablet at the gray-templed woman in the visitor badge, and then down the row at Master Sergeant Falkenrath, who was already looking at her, and the two of them had an entire conversation across 40 feet of concrete, without a word in it. Vauclain keyed her own radio, low, and said, "SDO, this is Vauclain at Kennels. Hold the 0900 records. Correction. I think the principal's standing in my dog yacht." Then she put the radio down and decided, the way good officers sometimes get to decide, to let the next 90 seconds happen. Sten Drain keyed his radio to call security, and at that exact moment, 2 runs down, the Dutch shepherd named Falkor began to scream. Falkor was the broken one, the 2019 dog, the one even Drain handled at the end of a catch pole on bad days. Something in the rising voices and the squared shoulders and the smell of adrenaline coming off, 4 humans had tipped him over, and he went up the front of his run in a way that was not display and was not noise. It was the real thing. 81 pounds of dog who had decided the threat was now hitting the gate of Run 6 hard enough that the 3rd zip tie on the latch, the one nobody had replaced since the spring, sheared clean through. The gate did not open, but it moved, and the sound of a working dog run gate moving when it is not supposed to is a sound that every dog on that row knew, and all 14 of them came up at once. Bran Dasson said a word he should not have said on the floor. Rickard Druitt went pale and reached for a catchpole, and could not remember which wall it was on. Drain spun toward Run 6 with his radio still keyed, and his face draining and the loud confidence gone out of him all at once, because a hot floor with a failing latch was the one thing his whole way of running a kennel had no answer for. He had spent 3 years teaching these dogs to read volume as a threat, and now there was nothing in the yard but volume. "Get the poles," he shouted, which was the worst possible instruction, because shouting was the accelerant. "Get back, everybody. Get back from the runs." Falker hit the gate again. The 2nd zip tie went. Now there was 1 tie and a worn latch between a tipped-over war dog and an open floor, and there were 13 other dogs reading the situation and getting ready to agree with him, and 4 handlers, and 1 captain, and 1 master sergeant moving fast now, but 40 feet away, with a feed cart in his lane. And 1 woman, standing perfectly still in the middle of it, who had built every one of those dogs and had not raised her voice once. Signia Faircliff did not run to run 6. Running was prey. She had taught the whole row 14 years ago that running humans were the wrong thing to chase, and standing humans were the right thing to wait on, and she was not about to unteach it in the worst 10 seconds of these dogs' lives. She turned her body, that was the first thing. She bladed her hips away from the runs and dropped her shoulders and brought her chin down and her hands open and low at her sides, and she became to 14 animals, scanning the yard for a posture to lock onto, the one shape in it that read as settled. The handler shape, the shape that meant the situation was being run by someone and that someone had it, and then she gave the word. It was not a shout. People who heard about it later always assumed it must have been a shout, some parade ground bellow, because how else do you stop 14 war dogs? It was the opposite of a shout. It was a single low word, pitched down at the bottom of her chest, where a dog feels it more than hears it. A word she had built into the foundation of every dog in that program as the master settle, the all-stop, the one cue that overrode arousal because it had been laid down before arousal. In 8-week-old puppies 10,000 quiet repetitions deep. One word. She did not even say it loudly enough for Captain Vauclin 20 feet back to be sure afterward what the word had been. Run. 4 heard it first. Valder, the loud one, mid-lunge at his own gate dropped. Not coward. Dropped, clean, into a down, chest to the concrete, eyes up, the way he had been taught before he had teeth to bite with. Then run 5. Then run 6, where Falcor, 81 pounds of broken dog, 1 zip tie, from open ground, stopped with his front feet already up on the failing gate, came down off the gate, and lay down in the wet straw of his run with his sides heaving and his eyes locked on the still woman in the middle of the floor. It went down the row like something poured. Run 7, 8, 9. The 2 German shepherds in 11 and 12. All of them, in the space of about 4 seconds, 14 of the most dangerous animals on Joint Base San Antonio, went from a hot floor to a row of downstays, silent, trembling, watching one woman who had not moved her feet and had not raised her voice. The kennel went so quiet, you could hear the cold coffee dripping off the bottom of Sten Drain's cup onto the concrete, because his hand had opened without his permission, and he had not noticed. For a moment, nobody breathed. 14 dogs lay in 14 downstays. Sing Faircliff stood among them, with her hips still bladed and her hands still open, and she did not look triumphant, and she did not look at Drain. She was looking at Falcor, the broken one, lying in his straw and shaking, and her face had finally done something, not much. Her jaw had set wrong, and the muscle under her left eye had pulled once and let go. Master Sergeant Falconrath reached run 6. He looked at the sheared zip ties, 2 of them, and the one worn latch, and he understood exactly how close the morning had come. Then he looked across the down dogs at the woman who had stopped it, and Edvard Falconrath, who had run this kennel for 9 years and had been a junior handler the night Brage went through that airman's arm, did the thing that decided the rest of it. He came to attention. On a dog floor, in front of 4 handlers and a captain, in the wet straw and the dropped coffee, the master sergeant squared his boots and brought his hand up in a salute, and held it to a woman in a civilian field jacket with a visitor badge clipped at the second hole. "Kennel Master Faircliff," he said. His voice cracked on the rank, and he let it. "Ma'am, I should have said something 3 years ago. I have wanted to say it every day since." The word Kennel Master landed on the floor like a dropped tool. Brandassen's head came around. Ricky Druitt's mouth opened. And Sten Drain, staff sergeant, owner of the war dogs, last man on the floor to understand the morning, stood in a spreading puddle of his own coffee and watched the dog, he said only listened to him, lie at the feet of a woman whose name was zip-tied to every gate on the row, the name he had read 100 times. "Faircliff," he said. It came out of him small, the F, protocol. That's. You'll stand the dogs up slowly, Signe said to him, not unkindly. It was the kindest thing she would do for him. All day, and she did it, on instinct, because the dogs were still in downstays, and a floor full of downstays is a floor that is still one wrong sound from coming apart, and she was not going to let these dogs pay for the worst day of his career. Hip out, quiet voice, one at a time, your line first. They'll come up settled. If you come up settled, don't make me the only handler they trust by the end of this, or you'll never get them back. And Drain, who had spent the whole morning refusing to step back from the fence, he bladed his hip. He dropped his voice to something he had probably not used on the floor in 3 years. The quiet voice. Her voice. The voice the report said was inappropriate to a high-stress operational environment. And he said his dog's name soft, and Valder stood up out of the down and came to the gate and pressed his head against the chain link where Drain's hand was, and the floor let out a breath it had been holding since 614. Captain Vauclin walked the length of the row, slow, past every downstay and every standing now dog, and stopped in front of Signe Faircliff. She did not salute, because a captain does not salute a relieved kennel master in a field jacket, and they both knew it. And there was something in the way Vauclin did not salute that was its own kind of respect, the respect of one professional acknowledging she had just watched another do a thing she could not have done. The 0900 hearing, Vauclin said. The records correction. That's you. That's me, Signe said. I held it, Vauclin said. I want the whole board to see the kennel cam from this morning, before they so much as open your folder. Be sub. She looked down the row at the dogs, settling now, and back at the woman. 3 years ago they wrote that your method couldn't hold a high-stress operational environment. She let the sentence sit there in the wet straw, among 14 downstays that had just held the highest-stress operational environment that Yard had seen in a decade. I'd like that footage entered into the record with a time code. And Signe Faircliff, who had driven 4 hours that morning to say goodbye to 14 dogs she had been told were not hers, looked at the captain and then at the master sergeant, still half at attention, and then at Sten Drain on his knees, now in the straw with his arms around Valder's neck. And she understood that the morning had stopped being about goodbye. What the records correction board saw at 1100, 4 hours after the kennel went quiet, was not the thing Signe Faircliff had driven up to give them. She had driven up with a folder and 11 mismatched seconds of a 3-year-old camera and a request that the line in her file be changed from relieved to reassigned. That was all she had asked for. 11 seconds and a corrected line. What they got was Captain Vauclin standing up before the folder was even opened and saying she wished to enter a new piece of evidence, recorded that morning. Time code 0617 to 0621 from 4 fixed cameras in the kennel yard, and would the board please watch it before reading one word of Kennel Master Faircliff's file. They watched it twice. They watched the gate at Run 6 fail. They watched a staff sergeant shout and the floor go hotter for it. They watched 14 patrol and explosives dogs come up at once on a floor with a failing latch, and they watched a relieved kennel master in a visitor badge blade her hips, drop her hands, and put every one of them on the ground with a single word pitched so low the yard microphones barely caught it. They watched Falkor come off a half-open gate and lie down in his straw. They watched a master sergeant salute her in the wet. The senior member of the board, a lieutenant colonel named Halston, who had signed off on the original relief 3 years before, watched the footage the second time without saying anything, and, when it ended, he sat for a while with his hand over his mouth. Then he asked, into a very quiet room, whether anyone could explain to him how a method that had just held 14 aroused working dogs through a gate failure had ever been described in an official report as inappropriate to a high-stress operational environment. Nobody could explain it, and then Signe Faircliff explained it quietly, the way she did everything. She walked the board through the 11 seconds. She showed them the East Gate camera. She showed them the time code in the original report and the time code on the footage and the gap between them where the board 3 years ago had stopped looking. She showed them the airman, giving Brage a hard verbal correction in direct contradiction of the protocol, and she showed them, leaning into frame behind him, a young sergeant in a duty uniform, telling the airman to run the dog hot, to make him sharp, to stop coddling him. She did not say the sergeant's name. She had thought about it for 3 years, what she would do if she ever got the 11 seconds in front of a board, and she had decided somewhere around the second denied FOIA request that she was not going to spend her vindication learning to be Sten Drain. She put the footage on the screen and let the time code say it, and the board read the duty roster for that night themselves, and the name was in the roster, and the colonel with his hand over his mouth read it, and understood that the man who had run the dogs hot that night, and let a woman take the fall for it, had been standing in the kennel yard that very morning, shouting at a failing gate, while the same woman put his dogs on the ground. That was the second axis, the one that made it not just a story about a clever woman and some dogs. Her method had not failed. It had been overridden, and then it had been blamed for being overridden, and then it had been erased, and a man had kept his career on the difference. The footage from that morning did not just prove she could stop 14 dogs. It time-stamped the lie. It made the thing irreversible. The board reconvened in the afternoon and corrected the record, not to reassigned, which was all she had asked. They vacated the relief entirely. They restored the F protocol as the foundation standard for the kennel, under its proper name, the Faircliff method. In the official curriculum, where it had quietly remained the thing every handler actually used while pretending they did not. And Lieutenant Colonel Halston, who had signed the relief 3 years before, asked the recorder to stop and then said to Signane Faircliff, across the table, off the record, that he had signed a thing he had not read carefully enough, and that he had thought about it more than she would ever believe, and that he was sorry. She let him say it. She did not make it easy, and she did not make it hard. She let it be the size it was. Sten Drain was not relieved that day. Sing yesed that he not be, which surprised everyone in the room, and surprised Drain most of all. She told the board that a kennel that fired every handler who had ever run a dog hot would be an empty kennel, and that the man was a good handler with a bad teacher, meaning himself, and that the failure that morning was not that he was loud, it was that nobody had ever made him stand next to someone quieter and stay. She recommended he be reassigned under direct supervision, retrained on the foundation protocol from the first condition Q, and made to take the puppy line, the 8-week-olds, where the only thing that works is the quiet thing, and the loud thing fails so fast and so obviously that even a man who loves his own voice has to put it down. It was not mercy. Exactly. Signane Faircliff did not have much mercy left after 3 years of teaching sit-stay to retired couples in a strip mall. It was something more useful than mercy. It was a sentence designed to teach. She had spent her whole career building dogs by laying the quiet foundation under the loud surface, and she did the same thing to the man who had cost her 3 years, because she did not know how to do anything else, and because somewhere underneath the tired, she suspected it was the only revenge that would actually hold. Drain took the puppy line. The first morning he squared his shoulders and barked a correction at an 8-week-old Malinois, and the puppy fell over and peed and would not come near him for an hour, and Bran Dawson, who was now senior to nobody but happened to be watching, told him quietly to blade his hip and drop his voice. The part of the morning Signane Faircliff never told the board about, the part she carried out of the kennel, folded up small and did not unfold for anyone, was Falkor. She stayed 2 extra days at the captain's request to walk the floor and rebaseline the foundation cues with the current handlers, and on the second evening, after the others had gone, she let herself into run 6. Falkor, the 2019 dog, the broken one, the one she had built as an 8-week-old 14 years before this and had not seen since the February night her career ended, came across the run and put his head flat against her chest and stood there, breathing while she knelt in the straw. She had not cried at the kennel that morning. She had not cried at the board. She had spent 3 years not crying about any of it, the way she had spent a whole career not raising her voice, because the not crying and the not shouting came from the same place in her, the place that had taught 14 dogs that the world is run by whoever stays quiet and stays still. She had buried a method and a kennel, and 3 years of her life under that stillness, and never once let it move. In run 6, in the straw, with Falker's heartbeat going against her sternum, she let it move. Not loud. Nobody saw it. She put her face into the broken dog's neck, and her shoulders came down a 1/4 inch that no one would have seen, and she stayed there in the dark of the run a long time. And the dog stood and let her, the way the dog had been taught 14 years before, that a still human in distress. When she came out of the run, her face was dry again, and set. And Master Sergeant Falkenrath, who had waited by the feed cart because he had suspected and had not wanted her to be alone in the parking lot afterward, walked her to her truck and did not say anything about her eyes, and that was its own kind of salute. A year later, the kennel at Joint Base San Antonio ran the lowest wash rate in the program's history, and the laminated card on Run 4 said, in fresh block letters, K-N-A-N, Master, Faircliff, S. Singh had not taken the job back full-time. She came up 2 weeks a month and ran the foundation line and let a younger handler run the floor, because 3 years in a strip mall had taught her some things about what a life is supposed to have in it besides a kennel, and she was not going to give those things back, even to the dogs. But she came up, and when she came up she taught the new handlers the same thing she had taught the dogs and the board and, eventually, Sten Drain, which was that the loudest thing in any yard is almost never the thing in charge of it, and that the woman the handler laughed at as she neared the kennel was, the whole time, the only person on the floor the dogs were actually listening for. On the last morning of her last visit that month, Singhi found a sealed envelope tucked into the visor of her truck. Inside was a Kennel Challenge coin, the heavy kind they only struck for the program's founders, with the F Protocol Q stamped around the rim in letters so small you had to know they were there to read them. There was no note. There did not need to be. She turned it over once in the cold, and put it in her jacket pocket, and got in the truck, and she did not yet know which new handler had left it, or which dog they meant her to come back for. And she decided, pulling out of the lot past the long row of runs, that she would find out the next time she came up. She did not find out yet. If you have ever been the quiet one, in a loud room, the one somebody decided was the petting zoo, before they ever heard your name, then you already know the only thing this story is actually about. And if you want to see what happens the next time someone in a uniform decides the woman at the gate doesn't belong there, that next story is already up on the screen right now. Go watch it. I'll see you down the row.